Hey guys, I'm Cole Horsman, Field CTO here at Sonrai Security. Yeah, I spent the last few years leading cloud security at a highly regulated insurance company and a highly innovative, fast-paced private equity firm. I've seen the tension between speed and control firsthand. So in this video, I'm going to test what happens when a business user uses AI to spin up cloud infrastructure and how things can go sideways. I'll show you how misconfigurations can sneak in, even when you're putting in your best effort, and how Cloud Permissions Firewall shuts it down in real time. If you're building with AI, you're going to want to see this. How do you allow innovation with this evolving class of business developers? People who don't really necessarily have coding background, they can hang, but they know more about the business and the functional aspects of what applications need to have to make the business run smoother. So today I'm going to run through, what I built here. This is essentially a vibe coder demo. I built it with Amazon Q initially. And then what I realized, I got access to the Kiro IDE this last weekend. So I was able to play with this a little bit. And the thing I love about Kiro is a kind of a game changer. It's the way they do spec-driven development. You kind of move from vibe coding, which is this loose ideas, unstructured, kind of unpredictable deployment or, test. It's kind of a playground. And you move into the spec-driven coding to where you're giving it instructions. You're telling it, hey, I want it to do this. You can also do steering documentation. You can also lay out your MCP servers right here in the IDE. And then you have agent hooks. So we kind of move toward agentic swarm coding, which is essentially having those agents run tasks automatically. And you can see here, I have a couple that are, this eye icon it's watching a file if a file changes, et cetera. These play buttons are manual configuration. So I can go through and say, execute this when I trigger it manually, or, when I do it, like if a file changes or a file moves or new file is created, et cetera. But anyway, back to the kind of the topic at hand today, Tom, the vibe coder, is going to build a Salesforce application. We're going to put a bunch of security measures in place within the IDE to protect it and prevent it from deploying bad things. However, even so, there are ways that this could slip through the cracks. Now, it's not always bad to have a public resource available to the internet. Sometimes that's intentional. However, when you're dealing with Salesforce data, it is critical that you leave that private, and that's other people's information. So you want to keep that in your domain. You do not want to leak that information out, financial data, et cetera. So this is kind of just to show that you need to have a multi-layered defense, and also kind of show some cool best practices that you can do with Q Developer, with Kiro IDE. I use Claude Code within this terminal as well. I've used Gemini. I think it's good to sanity check these once in a while and have each other in like peer review almost. I dabble in all of them. But I'm going to run through here and kind of show you what this is all about. This is just kind of the narrative. This is just the README for the narrative and just kind of tells us what we're trying to do. And then I'll get into a demo. Everything I'm doing is using these MCPs for AWS documentation, best practices, Terraform, so that I can deploy and destroy my stack for demos. And also so I can scan the Terraform plan for misconfigurations, assign it a security score, additionally, code smells and things like that, all within my IDE. So I'm building a system here that I can kind of develop anything. And that's the key with Kiro as well, is being able to not just Tom's environment. We want, like all developers, to have a safe environment. There are certain, in an enterprise, there are certain rules that you want applied to, or architecture guidelines, reference architecture, that you want everybody to follow. But you also want creativity to flow. So it's kind of a balance between that vibe coder completely loose to, okay, spec-driven coding. We've got some rules we want you to follow, but otherwise have at it. So I'll get into it now. So let's go into this file right here, the secure development platform. And now what I wanted to kind of really drill into is I set right at the top, here is the purpose of this project, and then SMART goals. And I'm not, an innovator in space. There's a bunch of documentation. Anthropic's got some really great examples and videos on how to do this yourself, but create specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goal for your project. It even applies to this coding document. So I ran through here a high level, here's what I'm trying to achieve. SMART goals is go funnels down. And then there's some guidelines here that run through as well. I won't go through all of these, but I'll make a link available so you can kind of see what I did here to get my specs, my overall objective done. Now from there, you can do steering. So let's do like Terraform patterns. There's certain rules that you want to follow for Terraform patterns. And, you want to make sure that identities have least privilege, avoid S3 public buckets, things like that. You can put those in here as well. These steer this in the right direction, but also referencing those MCP servers. It's using context from the MCP server to put into the Terraform patterns and the well-architected security. All of these, I connected the MCP server. Many of them, most of these don't require auth to AWS, by the way, but you can run those, connect that MCP and say, hey, update my steering documentation to include this MCP when I'm trying to deploy. So just FYI, you can get a pretty secure code environment from here. Still want to reiterate, you need to have other controls. This is not a silver bullet. So when you go to deploy something here, we're hopefully going to be able to see, hey, here's my layout. Here's what could go wrong. Hopefully Tom's aware of what could go wrong. Hopefully there's other ways that you can mitigate this as well. Let Tom deploy in a sandbox that doesn't have connectivity to sensitive data, things like that. Again, multi-layered, encrypt your data, things like that. This will help your developer environment for when you get new developers, junior developers, business developers. This is guardrails, but again, multi-layered approach. All right, so getting into it, we've got the agent steering documents. We've connected MCP servers. These are all connected and ready to go. I don't know what's going on with Fetch, but the AWS documents, the CDK, Terraform, well-architected. And by the way, these are all available at AWS Labs, GitHub repo for MCP. If you search that, you will find a ton of them. Some of them relevant to probably any AWS project that you're deploying, and others relevant to serverless, or if you're running EKS or something like that, you could connect an EKS server or MCP. Okay, so let me see here. So I think kind of high level, that's, again, Kiro IDE, if you don't have access to it, you can do this on your own. You can create these documents and say, steering documents and put them in a markdown file. That's what I was doing prior to discovering this last weekend. Now it just facilitates this much better. And if I get into the agent hook, I haven't covered that yet. Digital librarian. This is an agent hook that monitors files in the repository and updates documentation as I do it. It's essentially like monitoring for file changes and updating the README consistently, monitoring commits, etc. And then we got AWS Architect. So there's modernization, there's security and compliance. Your architect is essentially a role. And then you can do this on if the file is created, file saved, file deleted, whatever, manual. And it's looking for all these file paths. So, star.terraform, etc. And it's making sure that you have a cost optimization, you have architecture review, DR, scalability, infrastructure as code, making sure that everything's reviewed from an architect perspective. Engineer or security engineer, looking for identity security, looking for data security, CVEs and things like that. It's reviewing the code, and it's basically looking for any type of file and making sure that we're reviewing it from a security perspective. So you kind of get the gist here. You could simulate these are kind of synthetic departments or low-level engineers or analysts rather, that can take a look at your project and say, okay, we're no longer doing manual code scans anymore. You should not be doing manual code scans. And under the hood, this is using Checkoff, which is open source code scanning as well. So I'm kind of throwing the book at it from a security perspective, but you'll see that still there are things that can slip through the cracks. It is imperative that you have additional controls. Okay, so the whole gist of the demo, I'm going to run this vibe coder demo. It's going to do a Terraform plan and show me what it's going to deploy, give me a list of the infrastructure, attempt to deploy it, and then I'll see in the scan that it's bad, but I'm going to try to apply it anyway. And hopefully we can demonstrate how these additional controls that I have in my environment will block that from deploying. Let's see if that actually works. That's my assistant here is telling me to break a leg. Good luck on the demo. I ran a pre-vibe code checklist to make sure that my credentials are up to date, that everything is going to go as planned, and that I'm deploying to the right account, etc. You can do all sorts of stuff and it will just basically script on the fly. All right, so let's run the vibe coder demo. And I'm going to cross my fingers. And so I guess in the interim, we're going to run the risky infrastructure with Q developer, well, Kiro in this case. And it's just basically having me run this script right here. So nothing crazy right there. You could put this thing in what I call YOLO mode. Some people call it cowboy mode. Essentially, let it do its thing and very little interaction with it. Or you can have it like, yes, it may prompt you every time. Prompt engineering, you should be protecting that as well, making sure that you can't have sketchy prompts in there. I'm going to bring this up because this has got a lot of the information I want to go over here. All right, want to create a web app that will allow me to visualize Salesforce data in a better way, make it scalable, and deploy it on AWS. That's it. So that's a really good example of vibe coding. There are no guidelines there. That's all Tom said. And Tom's going to try to like spin up this thing and connect to Salesforce, whatever. What spec-driven coding is everything I just showed you, like adding context for steering, adding specifications for how we want this project to go, rules it needs to follow, et cetera. So that's the evolution from vibe coding to spec coding. And then the agentic hooks, I wouldn't call this agentic swarm coding. I would call this the intro to agentic coding. And we're getting there with these files being watched, and we gave it rules. So it's essentially going to go out and review those things and make updates on its own. When you get into like agentic swarm coding, you've got a bunch of those. They're automatically coding. It's hands off. So let's review here. QDevelop, create a Salesforce app. There are security risks. So it is noticing that there are security risks here. VPC with sensitive data tags. So we're going to make, it looks like this public instance going into a public subnet, and it's going to try to create a VPC. In my mind, if I'm putting my cloud security hat on, I don't want developers typically creating their own VPCs. They should be deploying to an existing private subnet or public subnet within an existing VPC. Typically, the platform team is managing VPCs, so that's a red flag. EC2 instance with public IP. In a sandbox environment, actually, even in a sandbox environment, there's almost no reason to put an EC2 instance in a public subnet. What you should do is deploy an EC2 instance in a private subnet and put a load balancer in the public subnet so you can put WAF in front of the load balancer or whatever the case may be. But typically, I would not ever allow an EC2 instance in the public subnet. There would have to be a pretty compelling reason. Open security groups. Now, again, if you want this thing open to the public, there are scenarios where this could be applicable, but that's a red flag for me, almost like this needs a review at least. Publicly accessible database. Very few times do I want that. Again, I come from insurance and, private equity. We don't have a ton of websites or databases that we're allowing public access to, other than some fringe use cases where we had to whitelist a couple of IPs in Redshift or something. Anyway, hard-coded database, password, and Terraform. Never okay. Environment variables, parameters, it's secrets manager, some sort of secrets management tool should be in place. And then production environment with sensitive data. That could be a production environment with sensitive data. That could be a normal thing, but the controls around that should be appropriate. Okay, so you can kind of see here. Let's see what we got. Oh, cool. We got a Terraform plan. It's probably paused down here, but you can see exactly what it wants to apply. Tom's not going to care about this. We made it do Terraform so that we can easily spin it down. But if we're getting to the point where business developers, natural language to deployment, Tom does not care about this. Tom will skip right and gloss right over this. Maybe he's curious, but this is exactly what's going to happen. This is exactly what I would expect. There's going to be an internet gateway, definitely some red flags in here, but we're going to see what happens. Okay, so we do see some failed checks. Now, what I would do in a normal situation, again, this is a demo and I want this to pass to demonstrate the issue. You could write something to fail. You can see these are checkoff, CKV checkoff. You could write these to fail builds if they have those misconfigurations. I can do another demo on that. I probably should, because I've done that in an environment where we want a bulletproof, it's a mostly bulletproof and development environment. I can write something that would block any merges if it doesn't pass a certain threshold. So that's what I've done before. If it's not a 90% pass, then you cannot deploy this or move forward with a merge. Okay, so we failed those. Let's see, HIPAA's not really, I'm not going to dive into that, but well architected, we're failing, and we're failing on some compliance stuff. But we're going to simulate a a security issue where Tom may not know that these things are happening or skips over it, accidentally deploys it. An accident is what I'm after. I typically do not see malicious issues in the last 5 years in our environments. There are some that come through, typically not in the AWS space. They're kind of after the email and the low hanging fruit that they can get access to. But what I see commonly is mistakes where someone accidentally makes a public S3 bucket, someone accidentally puts an EC2 in a public subnet. So that's what I'm trying to cover here is, maybe junior developers, maybe something that just, slips through the cracks. Anyway, those are the things I'm trying to cover. I'm going to push enter here and try to deploy this, and then we'll see what happens. And it got an error creating VPC. Now, let's see here. So it looks to me like it's creating a VPC and exactly what I expected to happen here. I'm going to bring this up on the screen. Now, what I noticed last year, I found what they call a permissions firewall. Sonrai Security is now who I work for because I started at Global Atlantic. I noticed this product last year, and it's tying together like the sensitive permissions in AWS, and it's basically looking for the sensitive permissions and saying, have somebody approve that. So basically what I can do is, in this case, somebody tried to create a VPC. Well, you notice almost immediately I got a notification that said EC2 instance create VPC in the sandbox. Do you want to do this or allow him to do this? Well, no, I don't. No, not please. And then I could say, please see VPC documentation. Okay. So in that case, I was able to deny this thing from going public just by using this chat ops feature within Slack. And what that does is, and if I were to say, yes, Tom, you're allowed to do that, I could hit yes, he would rerun the supply and it would work within seconds. So essentially it's giving you a firewall capability. And behind the scenes, what it's doing is using combination of service control policies, which you should be using. If you do not want certain services like being used, like maybe Internet of Things or certain regions, you should be blocking those. Sonrai does like the automation part of it and automates service control policies. So you should check that out if you're interested in automating it, but it's totally something that you can do on your own. And look, so it looks like we're doing okay. It does a cleanup script after it's done. So I think the demo worked here, but essentially the service control policies are key. And then again, protecting certain permissions. So what this does on the back end is uses an event trigger. And when that sensitive permission is triggered, an alert happens, it goes to Slack and you hit that approve or deny, and then it removes or adds you to a customer managed policy that's attached. So there's a combination of things that you could do: service control policies, customer managed policies, and attribute based access control, which is basically using tags, saying, moving from a role-based model to a tag-based model, saying that you can do or you can't do something based on the tag that's associated with the resource or policy. So basically, kind of just going to sum this up, but VPCA creation was blocked. Or blocking RDS, you can use again to block a certain service within that entire account. So no resources were complete or were deployed. This failed and cleaned up after itself because that's how I wrote the demo. But essentially, we were able to prove out that AI generated code and vibe coding, the identity is the key here. I've been kind of working on identity. Actually, the first thing that I figured out in AWS was like 2015. Identity was the focus. And my boss at the time was an early adopter, and he said, go figure out AWS and kind of run with it. And I noticed that the first thing that I needed to learn was how identity works. That's come a long way since 2015. It's gotten more complicated, more permissions, more services, more ways to integrate roles with instance profiles and agent roles and access keys and things like that. And by the way, if you're still using static keys, you should reach out. We should automate that and get rid of static keys. But anyway, the identity is kind of the key to protecting agentic coding. There are ways that you can manage yourself. Reach out, ping me if you would like some advice for free. Again, I also work for Sonrai. If you'd like to take a look at the firewall, it's very reasonably priced for what it does. So you should check it out. There's a free demo online as well, so that you can go sign up and just try it out for yourself, see if it works. basically deploys a CloudFormation stack with a role, and you can have you up and running within a few minutes to get that stack deployed. But I would just want to reiterate that multi-layer defense, a good setup in your IDE, good documentation for your AI assisted coding to follow, and some best practices. I'll share some links to what I've used from links from Anthropic and links from, other source AWS documentation, some MCP documentation. There's just all sorts of information out there. But I'll share some of those links as well. But yeah, hopefully you got something out of this. But just the main point is just to have a multi-layer protection when you're allowed vibe coding in your business. All right. Well, thanks for watching, and cheers.